at any time. So different types of givers. Some have little money, some have lots of money, some have in between. So my question is just when it comes to things like, what did we just go? Plan giving, do you have any idea, maybe what the, if I could put a dollar value on the assets and the wealth, what would you say is the average estimated starting point for anybody who even wants to think about plan giving?
It depends on, and we're going to hold that thought because in a few minutes
You
we're going to
understand
start about the vehicles, and I will tell you entry levels on those various vehicles. If it's a gift annuity, that is the very cheapest way to get into a planned gift, and that may be $10, $25, $50,000. Then the next step may be a charitable remainder trust. That could be in the hundreds of thousands, right on up into seven figures. So it just depends on the type of gift. So there's a lot of creative ways, and we're gonna talk about some of those creative ways in a few minutes. And I'm gonna give you a ton of acronyms. I do not expect you. There's no expectation for you to leave today to be a plan giving expert, but just to understand where you can take somebody and turn them from a suspect to a prospect. That's what I want you to be able to do today. We mentioned unusual assets, real estate, artwork, partnerships. A lot of that can be converted into liquid securities after someone starts a planned gift. Okay, so now we start talking about who. Those that are philanthropically motivated. You can have folks that may have tax issues and should give, but they're just not going to give. And you're running against a wall on those individuals. Now, you can have the opposite scenario where someone's not typically philanthropically inclined, but if they see that they can save some tax dollars, all of a sudden the green light goes off. Most are over 70 on planned gifts. You were asking me about dollar levels. Typically, we see planned gifts to older generation. So go back, if you have a way of taking your database, your donor base, and really kind of scrubbing it based on age, that's a good way to approach this. They could have sufficient assets for retirement, may have assets to maintain the current lifestyle. Maybe it's not enough income, so that's when we start talking about these planned gifts. They typically do this around their estate plan. It's a popular time to do that. A history of philanthropy. And one of the best examples I've got of that is I've had a lot of success with individuals who have had a 20 or 30 year track record of giving to an organization, and I say, you've done wonderful things for this organization. Now let's think about how to perpetuate that at your death. Otherwise, that gravy train ends at death. And so perpetuating that with an endowment or a planned gift can be very impactful. Because it makes it tough on the organization. I know we're not supposed to include that in our budget, but let's face it, if we've got 10 or 20 years history of getting those gifts, we kind of counted in the budget at that point, right? At some point that's going to end. We've talked about illiquid assets, looking for income, low yield assets, no heirs. That's a very popular opportunity is for a couple that has no children and they want to do something. Legacy, we're going to talk about legacy in a few minutes. Legacy is also key. And again, illiquid assets and appreciated assets. So if we flip over to the next page, that's a good segue into the legacy piece. So we talked about the left-hand side of these boxes are more feel-good, giving back to the community. You've been successful, an individual's been successful. Maybe he started a business and employs a vast portion of the population in that town. It's an opportunity to give back. Or if I had a child that was sick and the hospital took great care of that child, it's an opportunity for me to give back to support that hospital, that kind of thing. Or an individual that's had cancer, or a family member's had cancer, giving back. Supporting a cause, that would certainly be any of those medically related items, and supporting the community. It's the feel-good side of things. The right hand is a little bit more tangible, leaving a legacy. And this is a good illustration if you have a room full of donors. So you get the donors to raise their hand if they can name the full names of their parents. And of course, everybody can do that, right? You raise your hand. And then you say, keep your hands up if you can tell the full name of all your grandparents. Most of the hands stay up. Then you say, tell me the full name of, can you tell me the full name of all your great-grandparents? That's when the hands start to drop. So our legacy only lasts a couple generations, doesn't it? So good way to drive that point home. And, you know, if you watch the History Channel any, you've seen the stories of Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers and others. And some of their business practices were, let's say, less than above board. Well, but what do we remember them for now? Carnegie Mellon Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation. It's the good things that we remember them for. So that legacy can be very, very impactful and very important to a potential donor. Involving family, getting the next generation involved. I just mentioned Rockefeller a few minutes ago. That's an interesting example because the original founders of the Rockefeller Foundation were very adamant about supporting certain causes. That second and third generation changed those causes. I'm sure the first generation wouldn't have liked to see the changes that were made. The earlier you get that next generation involved in philanthropy, they're going to be more engaged in philanthropy. And more than likely, they're probably going to support some of the similar charities that older generation supports. So it's very important to get that generation involved. And that would be, so take that from a staff perspective. You've got donors that are probably maturing on up in years. Getting that next generation involved is really, really critical. Again, you could take that same demographics or that same data scrub and focus on the kids of those. Have any of you done that as an organization?
Say again?
Have any of you done that with your experiences with the nonprofits that you work with? That's a good way to kind of reach that next generation.
Motivation, you know, I guess you're gonna tell us how to motivate people, but when I see the cause, my wife and I, when we paid the funeral expense for her mom, we both made a decision we're gonna be cremated and leave it to Christ. Let's give that money that we would have given to the hospice, and you take care of us before that happens. And I recently talked to Elena about a scholarship for a nurse. So, you know, that's the steps that I thought I could best spend my money rather than spending $15,000 for a casket. You know, and I think that's, I remember talking to the nurse, I was explaining that, and she looked at me kind of funny. She thought I was going to ask her to be cremated. I said, no, I'm just telling you the motivation, you know.
Bingo. That's the kind of thing that organizations need to record, is those stories, because donors sometimes lacks vision, and they need to see those stories and how individuals are passionate about a certain cause, whether it's a scholarship or a new exercise facility or playground equipment or nursing home care, whatever the cause. You got to record that. You got to use anecdotal pieces for the public. So I think that's key. I'll give you an example of a recent scenario I had. We had an individual that passed away. The bank had been managing their affairs for 40-some years. 40-some years, long time. The individual died and left their entire estate. They didn't have issue, no kids, no grandkids, maybe some second and third cousins, but not close enough to leave significant assets. $7.5 million estate. Left a third to one organization, a third to another organization, and the final third was split between two churches. And so I had the pleasure of delivering that message to those institutions. And that individual had set up a charitable remainder trust for one of the beneficiaries that was getting a third. So they had been given notice by the clerk of court's office that they were getting a gift. And so they assumed that it was the balance of that charitable remainder trust, which was $60,000. So we're sitting down in a conference room. There's 3 of us from the bank and 2 of them. She was very close. The major gifts officer was very close to our client. And we said, okay, so we're going to talk about the gift and timing. We talked a little bit about timing. We said the gift is $2.5 million. And she broke down and started crying at that meeting because it was that much of an impact. But the takeaway to me was, as great as that occasion was, wouldn't it have been nice if the donor would have been able to see that? And the donor wasn't able to see that. So getting the family involved is important. We also do grants to set examples. So it could be a leadership grant or a challenge grant. Maybe it's, I pledge, I'll match all donations you receive up to $10,000 for the month of June. Now, that's a wonderful opportunity to leverage grant making. It works when the organization has a staff. If it's a small mom and pop charity or a small charity that has limited staff, it's really hard for that person to clean up after they close the doors, be the executive director, do the hiring, set up the next fundraising event the next week, and by the way, fundraise to match that challenge grant.
It's a good comparison of our staff and United Way staff.
So which staff has got a lot, which doesn't?
United Way.
Okay.
They're running pretty lean these days, actually.
I'm not gonna get in the middle of that one. I'd rather have my keys locked in the car than
No,
get in the
you
middle of that.
wouldn't.
So let's look on the next page, page 10, multiple ways to give. So we do outright gifts, right? Gifts during life. Immediate cash flow for the charity, they immediately get the money, there's immediate income tax deduction, and the grantor gets to see how those charitable dollars are used. I always encourage donors that are thinking about planned giving to go ahead and give during lifetime too. And honestly, if they don't like the way the charity's using the money, they can make the decision to switch that in their planned giving documents. It's important. It's a good litmus test. The downside is loss of control. We're always reaching for control. There's no benefit, there's no income or anything for the heirs. And a grantor must give subsequent donations for it to continue that project. Testamentary gifts, as we discussed, are at death. You keep those assets during a lifetime. That's a big advantage. They're not given to the charity until at death. You can get an estate tax deduction, but we talked a while ago how that's not as critical as it used to be. No impact during life. That was the example I just gave you about not being able to see how those dollars are used. And there's limited flexibility. Now, bequests can be done one of 2 ways. They can be done as a specific dollar amount. I bequest $50,000 to the United Way. Or I could say that I'll leave 1/5 of my estate to the United Way. There's pros and cons to both of those. If an individual is going through their assets substantially, $50,000 at the time of death may be more than 1/5 of the estate. So in both scenarios, it is important for the donors to constantly monitor their estate plans. When I say constantly, every few years, they should look at their estate plan. In general, I'll say if it's sizable, I prefer the percentage. I like to see percentage bequests. And then an example of both during lifetime at death is structured giving, planned giving programs. You can set up a charitable gift annuity or CRT during lifetime, or you can set up something at your death that benefits others. And those gifts are irrevocable. So let's go right into and talk about the different options or strategies. I don't like to call them products because I think there truly are strategies. and there's advantages and disadvantages to each one of these. There's charitable gift annuity, that's the entry level I was talking about a while ago. There's charitable remainder trust, CRTs, charitable lead trust, CLATs, and we'll talk about those. They're kind of the opposite of the CRT, and we'll distinguish that. Private foundations, that's a growing sector of philanthropy, but the entry level is pretty high. Really, to set up a private foundation, you need 2 to 3 million in assets.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. The rules are complex and very onerous, and the penalties can be substantial if you violate the private foundation rules. But that's why they've got me. That's how it keeps me in a job. Supporting orgs, an example of a supporting org would be Friends of the North Carolina Museum of Art. Well, all their grants go to where? The Museum of Art. So that's a supporting organization. The final one is the Donor Advised Fund, and I call that the Walmart version of a private foundation. Does any of your organizations, does United Way have a Donor Advised Fund program?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, it's a great program, and it's very flexible. You're not held to the private foundation rules that you would if you established a private foundation, and you're really kind of able to get other family members involved. Okay, so if we want to really start breaking these down, on the next page we talk about charitable gift annuities. It's just a contract. How many of you are familiar with annuities in general? Annuity concept. Okay. Same principle except the charity's involved. It's a contract between the donor and the public charity. The donor gives the public charity the money, and the charity promises them a percentage payout for the rest of their lifetime. It's pretty simple. Now, it's an insurance product. That makes it an insurance product. So you need to be registered with the state of North Carolina with the Department